I'm Allie Barefoot with Cotality, and this is Data in Context. This episode will be a part of a mini-series that we'll have right here on Cotality's YouTube channel, and we'll be taking a deeper dive into Cotality's monthly home price index report. The housing market right now is a giant puzzle. On one hand, you have headlines telling you the market's cooled off, and it's true. Cotality data shows that prices only grew 1.4% in July. But on the other hand, our research also shows that half of the markets are seeing price increases, such as Chicago, Philadelphia, and more. So what's really going on? That's why we'll be taking a deeper dive with Cotality's chief economist, Dr. Selma Hepp, and she'll be breaking down the data and where affordability is reshaping the market. Selma, thank you so much for joining us again on Data in Context.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back, Allie.
Of course, I look forward to talking about our monthly home price index reports, and I really enjoyed reading and analyzing September's latest issue. And that kind of leads into my first question that I had for you, because I saw something that was a little bit atypical, and it was talking about the decline in July home prices, a pattern we have not seen since 2022 and the 2006-2008 period. So from your perspective, I'm very curious, what is the key difference between this July's decline and those in the past?
This July is a decline in home prices between June and July. And what we typically see is an increase in home prices. It's a smaller increase than we see earlier in the spring, where most of the demand is happening, but it's still usually an increase. So it was atypical to see this decline. Last time we saw similar declines was in summer of 2022. And that followed increase in mortgage rates. You know, we're now in the middle of this mortgage rates or increase in federal funds rate now, which led to increase in mortgage rates. And we are now actually, today was the Federal Reserve meeting, and they lowered federal funds rate by 25 basis points. Prior to that, in anticipation, we saw a significant decline in mortgage rates. So we saw actually opposite happen in summer of 2022, where mortgage rates went up, slowed the demand, and led to a home price decline. Now, why did a home price decline happen this July? Was for similar reason. If you look at the mortgage rate path over the last year, it was slowing coming into 2025. But as this talks about tariffs came on and fears about recession, mortgage rates increased, not necessarily due to recession, but more around tariffs. And so we saw a jump in mortgage rates, and that was again in the middle of spring home buying season, which led to weakening of home buying demand and then decline in home prices. Last time, prior to 2022, where we saw declines in home prices between these 2 months, happened during the 2006 and 2008 housing market collapse. And that was driven by different reasons. One was that market was collapsing overall. It was a perfect storm of factors that drove the decline in the housing market, following a bubble of home price appreciation leading to up to that period. So it was something that was a longer trend, unraveling of a number of factors that drove that home price to decline versus what we are seeing right now in 2025.
That's definitely very interesting what you said about that decline between the month of July and June, and now we're heading into the month of August data, but the September HPI highlighted something that's not very atypical, and that is the affordability gap. Unfortunately, homebuyers right now, they need about an additional $200,000 compared to a decade ago. So my question for you is, how is this challenge influencing buyer behavior, and what does it tell you about the resilience of demand?
Yeah, so affordability gap has been a big issue over the last couple of years, especially when mortgage rates jumped in 2022. It really exacerbated the amount that one needs to pay a typical mortgage payment. According to our estimates, a typical mortgage payment, excluding insurance and property taxes, which is another issue, went up as much as 70% due to increase in mortgage rates. So affordability, huge concern, and people need a much higher income that has has not kept up with home prices. So what did we see as a result? Well, one thing we saw was slowing of home buying demand. That's why home sales activity are now at some of the lowest levels that we've been historically. The other reason is that consumers or younger households may have opted for cheaper housing. So for housing that's maybe further away from the city, that's more affordable, or that's generally in the more affordable parts of the country. So looking at our September HPI, we saw home price appreciation in Midwest, for example, remained pretty strong. And the reason is that affordability is much better in that part of the country. The other on the sort of flip side of that demand for housing is that people may have opted to stay in rental housing. So we saw demand for rental properties remain strong, and so as a result of that, rent increases or rent declines that we saw for a short period of time have stabilized. And in our single family rent index, we see some signs of that rent has stabilized because people are opting for rental properties because they cannot afford to buy a home right now.
Sounds like there's a lot more factors into buying a home now than just, I like how this house looks and I want to buy it.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of factors that are contributing to that now. And you noted in the September HPI that I really liked is that pending sales are up. But you also noted that deals are a little bit more difficult to close. Like I said, it's not just anymore about, I like this house, I want to buy it. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And sometimes that leads to deals falling through. What's the main point of the friction here? Is it lenders, appraisals, or something else entirely of why these deals are falling through?
Yeah, well, there are a number of reasons. Appraisers and lenders are certainly part of it, especially in markets where home prices are declining. So you have a comparable property that's sold at much lower price than what the current homeowner is expecting, and so the property is not able to appraise at that level, and the buyer cannot get financing. So that's part of that reason. Another reason is that buyers just simply have cold feet. When you have this environment in which a housing market is pivoting, you see slowing of home price appreciation, declines in some market, that tends to scare people, and they are worried that they may be buying on top of the market, and they become much more sensitive to issues that otherwise wouldn't bother them. And for example, one of them could be home inspections. During the pandemic, we didn't care about home inspections because all we wanted to do is buy that home. Now home inspections may be more important, and people and if you don't have a good home inspection or there are issues that may create cold feet for buyers. The other thing is sellers too. Sellers may have unrealistic expectations. They want still those prices that were in the market last year or earlier in the summer before home prices declined, and so they're unwilling to lower their prices. So you really have a number of things going on here that's driving that dispersion between pending sales and closed sales.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned, a lot of buyers having cold feet, and I do completely understand that. But another data point that we're seeing, and most recently this HPI report, is investors are now making up a third of all home purchases. So a lot of these people are not looking for their first home, they're looking for a second or a home just to have for equity. So is this a healthy sign for the market, or does it point towards a growing resilience or growing reliance, I should say, on non-owner occupied transactions?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, presence of investors in the housing market has been a hot topic, and we've seen an increase in investor activity over the course, particularly as we enter the pandemic. But it's been on the rise over the last decade, and it actually has averaged around 30% for a while there, and it's now bounced back up to 30%. So what do we have happening? When housing market, we still one major fundamental of the current housing markets is that we're still undersupplied. Many markets are undersupplied. That creates opportunities for investors. They can come in, renovate the property, or not renovate, rent it out, and get a better return on that rent than they would otherwise if they sold the home. So there are many reasons for investors to come in. That's not necessarily always a bad thing, because sometimes in an environment where there's uncertainty, especially when home prices are declining, investors are the ones who stabilize home prices, because they come in and they do make offers before home prices continue to fall further. So, there's two sides of this, and I think the reason why investors are still so active is, again, because we continue to have a really undersupplied housing market, and our population growth over the last decade versus the increase in new construction has been much larger. So pent-up demand is there both for purchase and for rental housing.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely find that to be a little bit curious about how sometimes deals may be closing through for somebody buying their first home, but investors are seeing this as a great asset for them and possibly even wanting to add a little bit more. And you mentioned earlier in the podcast that there are a lot of pockets of affordability, and we're really seeing that around the Midwest and the Northeast. Do you think that's going to continue? And my follow-up question is, what would it take for the trend to reverse or for prices to kind of level off in those areas?
Yeah, so affordability is a very big help in those markets, because those markets are more affordable. And home prices are low, or when you have a larger increase in mortgage rates, it impacts those markets a little bit less than, say, markets where homes are much more expensive, like the
Right.
coastal markets. So affordability is helping and will continue to help demand. But another thing that you need to have a sort of healthy housing market is job creation and population growth, right? And so for these markets to continue this level of both price appreciation and demand for housing, you would have to continue to see job creation. And so one thing that would have to change and would slow or lead to home price declines in the area is if you say, if you have large increases in unemployment or people decide to leave the area, which, neither one is projected at the moment.
Right. And you've kind of touched on a few things that could happen that could affect the market. But my last question here for you, Selma, is what is one key indicator that you're going to be watching over the next few months that will kind of tell us where this housing market is headed?
Yeah, I mean, there are many things to watch for. This disconnect between buyers and sellers. Obviously, the pending sales do end up in closed sales. How many people are trying to buy homes, but really the one indicator, and I think maybe, I don't know if that's a result of today's Federal Reserve meeting, and interest around how does that impact mortgage rates, is really mortgage rates. Mortgage
Right.
rates do drive demand, and we, like I said, when we do see decline in mortgage rates, we see a boost in home buying activity and refi activity as well. So, that will be one indicator that will tell me what happens in 2026. Because at this moment, 2026, with such low affordability, is still going to be a challenging year for buyers. So if we see much mortgage rates come down even lower, that would certainly boost demand for housing next year.
Well, that's definitely something that I will now be looking out for as well. Thank you so much, Selma. It is always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm very much looking forward to see what the October home price index report will look
Yeah.
like. Are we already there?
We are already there. It's the end of the year almost. But yeah, thank you.
I
Thank you so
I
much for
can't
having
believe
me, Allie. It was a pleasure talking to you.
it. Of course, Selma.